I would like to talk to you about a lovely old camera. The Canon 5D Classic, as it has become known online, is a camera that was released in 2005. At the time of its release, the Canon 5D was an affordable, quote-unquote, full-frame camera. Now when you look at the 5D, it's become this, it's kind of like an old Mercedes in a way. It's depreciated so much since it was released that buying one now it's a bargain. When you look at the features of a Canon 5D Classic against say the camera that I'm recording with right now, the Fujifilm X-H2S, we have definitely come a long way. Autofocus points, frames per second, megapixels, max ISO, the user's ability to interpret anything on the rear screen. The 5D is a dead simple camera. In fact, it's so simple that it literally only takes photos, no video functions. When was the last time you used a camera that only shot photos, outside of a film camera? That's pretty wild. One of the best things about this camera is without a doubt the price factor. I paid $350 AUD for this, and it came with a lens, battery, and a charging cable. The EF lens mount is also great because it has existed for such a long time now that you'll have no issues finding good glass for your camera. It's also like a real tank of a camera. Like, I forgot, having used a 5D for so long, just how comfortable it was to hold all day. Like, some people will say that it's too heavy. Like, I get that, but there's something about it that's just so, it just feels right, you know? The shutter sound too is very satisfying. However, the real reason that you should be getting this camera above all else, it's for the image quality. It can be hard to judge a camera without actually using it before you purchase it. And there's been plenty of times when I've watched a review of a camera's image quality and thought, yeah, it's good, but I can very easily replicate that with my own camera. I don't say this lightly when I say the Canon 5D has, I'm gonna say, some of the nicest image quality that I've ever seen in a camera. There's just such a nice filmic, grainy quality to the images. No, it's not gonna be the sharpest. It's not gonna be the most detailed images. But what you get is this special sauce that really makes photos just pop. Unfortunately, we have now arrived at the point of the video where I start talking about things that aren't so good about the Canon 5D. I mentioned earlier that the Canon 5D Classic is kind of like buying an old Mercedes. Yes, it may be cheap. Yes, it's gonna look sick and you're gonna feel good when you're using it, but don't get me wrong, there's gonna be some problems under the hood. My unit has a lot of technical issues. The rear screen does this weird thing where it looks like you've hit the posterize effect on Premiere Pro, and you have to tap the screen a few times to make it go away. Not sure why that's happening. 20-year-old camera things, I guess. Coupled with that, the mirror inside the shutter fell off one day. And I thought, I may as well just glue it back on. What could possibly go wrong? Well, the glue expanded when it's set, and now the mirror is it's not on a level plane on the shutter. It's kind of hard to explain, but basically what that means in practice is whenever I look through the camera, even when something is actually in focus, it doesn't actually look like it's in focus. That's that's bad. That's really bad. So my rule of thumb with the camera is to just shoot with a very flat focus and usually f8 or higher, just to avoid any mishaps. Also, there is a significant amount of dust on the sensor, and even though I've used an air blower, the internal sensor cleaning, it won't go away. So it probably needs to be cleaned by a professional. In terms of the camera's functionality outside of the things that are wrong with it, the rear screen it's so hard to see if you've actually achieved focus. It's very low res, and it appears much warmer than it actually does on a computer screen. I don't know if that's an age thing or if that's just a camera sensor talking to the screen on the back of the camera thing. Your mileage may vary. The autofocus inside the camera, look, there's 9 autofocus points. So I usually just rely on the center point focus because that's the most reliable one, and I just recompose my shots usually. That is not always intuitive, and it's not always accurate, especially coupled with my viewfinder issue. Using a CF card, it's really annoying. Also, it only has one CF card slot, which means you can't have redundancy when you're out in a shoot, which is not a deal breaker, but it does fill me with a little bit of anxiety because of how old the camera is, and maybe the CF cards are also just as old. Something could go wrong. The Canon battery that came with the camera, it's not that good anymore, but I got a Wasabi Power third-party battery, and that has lasted really well. I believe that using lots of different types of cameras is a way of keeping you as a photographer thinking about and evaluating scenes and not using technology as a crutch. It could also just be a meek justification for buying cameras all the time. We'll never know. I guess I would call the Canon 5D like a workout camera. It's very unforgiving if you mess up your settings in camera, and that's why I like using it as a secondary or like a tertiary camera on a shoot. I know that most people shoot film for that reason, as a way of making sure you get things right in camera and you slow down and focus on what it is that you're doing. The 5D produces filmic looking photos basically for free. And also you can't even really interpret the photo on the back of the camera anyway, so it's essentially like shooting film because you're not really going to see what you get truly until you bring it back to your computer. And, elephant in the room, I am a Fujifilm user, which means I'm using APS-C cameras most of the time. So using a full frame camera, it's nice. You get a vibe with the full frame camera that you can't achieve anywhere else outside of full frame. So yeah, that's nice. So who would I recommend this camera to? I think the obvious place to start is with people who are just starting. You'll have a large library of lenses to look at and purchase. There's plenty of examples of 5Ds going all the time, and it will allow you to get into a system in case you want to pursue photography later on and upgrade your lens library and your cameras overall. You don't really want to have to spend too much money in case you decide, photography isn't really for me. And the initial cost of investment into this camera is pretty low. So the risk of not really being into photography it's smoothed out a little bit by the cost of entry. I would also really recommend this camera to someone who uses a mirrorless camera and has never shot a DSLR before, simply because it's a nice way to switch up your way of thinking about digital cameras and the ways of seeing through a camera. If your work is mostly centered around people, like portraits, hell, you could do live gigs with this, event coverage, that kind of thing, or even studio, especially studio work. This camera would be perfect for that. I know that the tethering between camera and computer doesn't really work anymore, so you wouldn't be able to have a live view of your photos as you're shooting, but you could still use it in an environment like that and get really good results. I was recently talking with a photographer and we got onto this quote from another photographer, I'm not sure who, but the quote goes something like, "The simplest camera has more potential than any photographer will ever exceed." I think that quote aptly applies to the Canon 5D. Yes, it's prehistoric in terms of camera technology, but you've seen the photos I've got with this. Hell, there's some printed right behind me. It's such a good camera, and it would be such a shame for someone to pass up on the camera because they thought it was old or too simple. Believe me when I say this camera shouldn't be slept on. There's a reason why a million videos have been made about it, and it has such an enduring legacy. I understand now. The hype is real.